Welcome to the Top of Mind podcast from Altos Research. This is the show where we talk to real estate industry insiders and experts about the trends shaping the market today. Enjoy the show. Mike Simonsen here. Thanks for joining me today. Welcome to the Top of Mind podcast. If you follow along with Altos Research, you're familiar with our weekly real estate market data video series. With the Top of Mind podcast, we seek to add context to the discussion about what's happening in the market from leaders in the industry. Each week, Altos Research tracks every home for sale in the country, all the pricing, all the supply and demand, all the changes in that data, and we make it available to you before you see it in the traditional channels. People desperately need to know what's happening in the housing market right now. So if you need to communicate with people about what's happening, buyers and sellers, go to altosresearch.com and book a free consult with our team. We can review your local market and teach you how to use market data in your business. All right, let's get to the show. Today, we are talking about all things ADUs, accessory dwelling units. ADUs are the small, self-contained residential units located on the same lot as an existing single-family home. You might know them as granny flats or in-laws or even casitas. Given the housing affordability crisis in our country, ADUs are starting to really gain traction as a potential solution for this. So what trends should we be aware of when it comes to ADUs? And my guest today is Mike McNamara. He's going to educate us on all things ADU. Mike is the CEO and co-founder of Samara, a company that aims to take ADUs mainstream. So 4 years ago, Mike was leading an innovation team at Airbnb. 2 years ago, that team was reborn as Samara. Mike has a long career in manufacturing and technology. He spent 13 years as CEO of Flex, formerly Flextronics, electronics manufacturer, where he had 200,000 employees in 30 countries. And I'd love to talk about that. He's also had various leadership positions at Intel and worked even as a production foreman at Ford. And I can imagine that some of that manufacturing background goes into what you're doing with the ADUs. So let's dive into ADUs today. Mike, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Mike. That was a great introduction. I appreciate that. I'm excited to talk about some of the things going on in real estate.
Excellent. Okay. So what I like to do is I read a little bio for you, but tell us about how we got here, your background and Samara and give us the origin story.
Yeah. I've always loved building things, ever since I was very, very young. And a lot of my jobs were actually in warehouses and factories. And, when I was in high school, in fact, I was in the union at one point while I was going to high school. I was a Teamster. So I've always been very interested in factories and, heavy operations, those kind of things. You mentioned the production foreman at Ford Motor Company. I was actually going to college. I went there for 2 or 3 years and then kind of ran out of money and got a job as a foreman when I was only 20 in a factory and loved it. I loved the way it smelled and the way it worked and how cool it was when everything ran together and in sync. And it was just like a really fun experience. So anyways, after I got out of there, went to a variety of different manufacturing positions, ended up as a startup company with Sequoia and Kleiner backing. And I was CEO of a company in 1994, which was then acquired by Flex. And Flex was a very small company. We became, the U.S. and European and ultimately South American and a bunch of other stuff, ran those parts of the business for Flex and ended up being chief operating officer and then was CEO for 13 years. So, when I was at Flex, and it's kind of a long story to get to where we are now, but I love building things. And at Flex, 200,000 people, in order to employ 200,000 people, you got to build a lot of things. So we were the fourth largest solar manufacturer in the world in terms of solar panels. We had multiple $1 billion in the medical business, multiple billion in the automotive business. We had $4 or $5 billion in data centers and consumer products and cell phones. And, we built all the Xerox machines for many, many years that nobody even knows. But every one of them came out of a Flex factory. So you fast forward that, and I started getting interested in building and construction. I was CEO of Flex for 13 years. We ended up, when I was there, we went from 120 million in sales all the way to, 26, 27 billion. And I was interested in building and construction. It was the only industry I didn't really get into. And I started dabbling in it. Even started a little building and construction software company that managed materials, and started dabbling in it. And anyways, I was at Flex for 13 years, decided to do something different, started getting into venture capital and some of the passion I had, because I started so many different companies at Flex as well, and ran across Joe Gebbia at Airbnb. And it was like, that's pretty cool. So anyways, I started working with Joe, and Joe and I hit it off right away. Joe's this incredible visionary, and design, has this amazing passion for design, and I'm the hardcore operator, industry, vet who's built and done anything and everything in every country in the world. And it was just like a really nice match. So I started working with Joe, and Joe said, why don't you come and run Samara, which was just this little tiny R&D startup within Airbnb, kind of off to the side. And anyways, I started working with Joe. We had a great relationship. And, after a while, we just said, this was one of the projects. So just to back up a little bit, Joe started Samara in 2016, not as it exists today as a separate company, but as this research arm thinking about the future of living, and how it might affect, Airbnb, how they might think about how living evolves and changes, and how they need to be ready for it. And so we created this research arm that kind of worked off to the side. I started working on that with Joe. Then COVID hit, and then we just kind of we said together, it's like, this really needs to get spun off. So Airbnb is this, 85% gross margin software company that has like 5 million hosts. And gee, should they work on building a $300,000, 25% gross margin hardware product? Or should they figure out how to go from 5 million hosts to 6 million hosts? It's kind of like, and they're real good at managing hosts and being able to drive that growth. So we just kind of said this needs to be its own separate company, and then it can really thrive on its own. So Joe and I co-founded what is today Samara and spun it off. So it was kind of a long journey on how I ended up getting into building houses, but the passion for building and how to build things like insanely efficiently, and using the world as using all the world's resource to be able to get to where we could build something that was really great at a really good price. So that passion's never been away from me.
That's terrific. And you said a bunch of things that are really interesting. So first of all, a couple of things that I think are fun. I have a history with Flextronics, with Flex. Before I started Altos Research almost 18 years ago now. But before that, I was building network security systems, Silicon Valley network security systems. And so we were, they'd come off the Flex lines, and, 25 years ago, I was a customer. And then I also had an investor in a company that Airbnb bought like 14 years ago. And so I was along the Airbnb journey a little bit too with some of that share. So we have a little bit of that background together, just sort of maybe by nature of being in Silicon Valley long enough, you get with that overlap. So that's great. You said one thing that Joe had described, and he called it the future of living, like exploring the future of living. We're talking about ADUs. Do you feel like our ADUs, do you see them as the future of living, or as like an element in the future of living? Tell me how we think about it.
Yeah. We were looking, when we were, doing the research lab at Airbnb, we had a number of different products and a number of different initiatives. And when we really looked at what has legs, what has scale, what has applicability in the world, and you go start a company, you have to go solve a real problem. So it's just like, I want to do this because there's a million other people building houses. It's like you really want to be able to solve a real problem. And if you look at, so we thought ADUs were a future of living. It's a different way of living. And when I say that, it's like having this amazing space in your backyard that you can now use in many different ways. So it's about the use case. It's about the financial return that you can get from an ADU. It's how to live life better. So the home is an amazing place. It's where your memories are. It's where you live life. It's where you bring up your family. It's the most important part of who you are. And it's also, surprisingly enough, if you look across the country, it's probably the largest source of financial value that you have in your portfolio. If you think about your own balance sheet, so to speak, usually the home is like the number one part of that balance sheet. So it's important economically, and it's also important just in how we live life. So we looked at ADU and we just said, wow, people have to be able to live their life. And we're in California. I think you're in California as well. And if you look at the cost of housing and the difficulty and the amount of starter homes that are available, all these things didn't exist. And if you look at how people live life, to be able to have a utility space in your backyard that you could use over and over again in many different environments or many different stages of your life could be really interesting. So we actually did view it as a different way of living. There's an interesting stat. In California, the average person is in his backyard or in his house for like 17 years. So you just think about yourself, Mike. What happens over the course of 17 years? You have, 2 kids. You send them off to college. You need to bring grandma in, because she, needs a place to live. You start up a business, you have work from home. You never even know. There might even be an epidemic someday and we might all be stuck in our homes and need more space. So we kind of viewed this as this is a way of life. So think about having this in the backyard and you use it and over the course of 17 years, you might use it in all those different ways. I remember I had an ADU myself. It wasn't such a thing as an ADU, but when I was in my 20s, I was living in a 2-bedroom house. I had a baby. My wife was working. I was working. We didn't have a lot of money. My wife went and started her own design business. I took the garage and converted it into a studio. And it was really cool. It provided a place for her to be able to work. But it was just, 10 steps from the house. So it was really kind of cool. We had our friends come over. We were still in our 20s. We had our friends come over, family come over. They come to stay with us. They didn't, it was in a 2-bedroom house. They didn't have to stay on the couch. They could actually, we threw a airbed in the studio, and they loved it. They thought it was like an amazing experience because they had this big garage, and I made, full high ceiling wall, ceiling and things like that. So it wasn't an ADU back then, but it was this flex space. And by the way, when I sold it, I'm pretty sure my equity value in my house, I lived in that house for 8 years. I sold it. I'm sure the equity value in my house was appreciated as a result of having this really cool looking flex space, which was formerly a 2-car garage, unattached, that allowed to do it. So, this idea of having a flex space, particularly in today's market, there's other stresses we can talk about in terms of, the cost of housing, things like that. But to be able to use this so many different ways to help yourself financially, to help your experiences, to help you start up businesses, to help grandma out, all these kind of things. And, maybe there's more to helping out grandma. Maybe, the cost of putting her in a assisted living is through the roof. Maybe, and by the way, she can't take her dog there. And maybe it's like a great babysitter to have in the backyard. So you think about the dwindling size of families over time. It's, part of that is the cost of raising children, and maybe that eases some of that pain. So there's just so many different use cases that we actually believed an ADU is a way to change how we live, to have a richer life and to have more financial security because, we fully expect these to appreciate at the same rate the front of your house appreciates.
That's great. So just to be clear, we're talking about a standalone, when you call it the product that Samara is designing is a standalone, I think you said it's like $300K construction. So it's a unit. And tell us about that product.
Yeah. So we have 4 different products. We have a studio, a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, and a 2-bedroom, 2-bath which, by the way, Mike, just hit the website yesterday.
Okay.
Yesterday afternoon. So
get the exclusive launch.
Yeah, it's actually not announced, so you get the exclusive. So, anyways, it's so we have this full range, so you can take anywhere from 420 feet all the way to 800, and you pick what works in your backyard or what fits in your backyard. It's an amazing product. We of course I'm biased, as you know, but. We started with this real design ethos. So, Joe and his co-founders, in fact, Brian Chesky, who's the current CEO of Airbnb, are both from RISD School of Design. So these guys are, design people. They started with every product should have a real design feel. I mean, a properly designed product can really make the difference between success and failure. So we have this heavy duty design ethos. We designed it to be, we just obsessed over every detail. So we obsessed over the colors, the corners, the edges, what are the materials? So we use all modern materials. It's, we use heat pump to heat it just because it's all electric. It has very high insulation values, typically uses about half the energy of the house in front. We have high solar generation that you can put up. We can kind of over generate using our system, by maybe up to 3x, because we can put so much solar generation on the roof that it can actually feed the front of the house. We use all modern materials. We use a metal roof. We have metal insulated panels on the outside, or, if you wanted something different, you can have, a different external cladding, but everything is designed to be perfect, and it's all around a steel frame. So this thing is highly precision engineered. So every single hole was put there by, a machine, because we roll these through automation, through a machine, and we put them up and construct them perfectly. So you've got an amazing precision in here. And the last thing I might mention is HVAC. We have a ducted system that's insanely quiet, but kind of more importantly, it all has very high filtration. So we filter particles down where we can actually capture some of the bacteria and also some of the things like wildfire smoke, things like that. So as you get smaller and smaller particle size, it gets harder and harder to filter those out. So we've put in a system that's very California ready. We wanted to make sure we helped out with the cleanliness of the air people breathe and be able to think about wildfire smoke or anything else coming at us. So it's just like an amazing product. And, of course, we think it's really beautiful, and made it so that we can manufacture it as cost effectively as possible.
Okay. So I love that context about what we're actually building. And it's funny because, the houses that I've owned in California are not precision manufactured, and they are old, and they're gappy, and they're uninsulated and all those things. So it's really fascinating thinking about dropping in the additional unit, that's the one where the quality is in the space. Are you finding that that's true with your customers? Like, are you dropping in where folks have, like, what kind of, where are they going in, and what's that customer experience look like right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're focusing on the California market. We just launched the company, and started marketing about a year and a half ago. So we want to make sure we establish a foothold and win in a market that makes the most sense. So California makes the most sense because it probably has the most housing stress in the entire nation. And it has, it also, if you rent these, a lot of these things, I mentioned all the use cases before. One of the use cases I didn't mention is just income on demand. So you now have, I mentioned equity appreciation in terms of financial security, but with income on demand, you can rent it for 1 month this summer. You can rent it for 3 months this year. You can rent it for 6 months next year. You can rent it this year, but not next year. You can at your convenience be able to dial the amount of income that you can bring in. But getting back to why we're launching in California, we think about it as being very focused on, you got high rents, you got probably more multi-generational living going on in California than anywhere else. So you have people that need homes and it's just really expensive. There's some other stuff maybe we talk about later in terms of the lock-in effect and that sort of thing with interest rates. But we just decided, so we're launching in California. We've just had a big article in some of the government officials in a Sacramento launch 2 weeks ago. So it's the first time we moved into the Sacramento marketplace, but we're heavily focused on that. And as far as an experience, think about this. Think about your construction project. Almost everybody's done a construction project. Almost everybody who's done a construction project never wants to do a construction project again. The average residential construction project, it's also good data on this too, is like 30% over budget. So when you think something's going to cost you $200,000, it's probably going to cost you $300,000. And it's very consistent because there's so much variability and unpredictability when you're doing a construction project in your backyard. You have weather, you have unknown issues that pop up, you have, guys rolling in and rolling out, and maybe they came in that day and you're managing all these subs and you're trying to coordinate subs. I got my electrical sub, my plumbing sub, and my foundation sub, and my drywall sub, and my painter sub, and I've got all these guys that I'm trying to coordinate all these people that don't actually work for me. And so it's hard. So to put up an ADU, it's probably going to take a year and a quarter. And that's a lot of pounding for the neighbors and everything else. Think about us going into your backyard and 30 days later, handing you some keys. And that's kind of amazing. So we would go into the backyard. So what's the experience like? We'll be building this in the factory somewhere which is no one's looking at. And then we get your ground prepped. So we go get your foundation in. We go dig the trenches, to 18 inches deep, whatever it is we've got 3 utility connections we have to do. We have to do electrical, we have to do wastewater, we have to do water. We don't need gas because we're all electric. And we do those things. So it's putting in the foundation, which, has some digging and such to it. And then we go and we take this and we just pick it up with a crane. We drive it in with a semi. We pick it up with a crane. Once it's picked up, it literally takes 10 minutes to get to the site. Literally, this thing is flying through the air, 10 minutes. You drop it on. Like our 1-bedroom, 1-bath has 8 bolts. So you drop it on, we bolt it in, and it's done in 2 hours. It is mechanically and physically sound in like a 2-hour process. So we go from just like a foundation that's sticking up this far in your backyard to having an actual house on there. And the whole process we think is going to take, it takes a little bit different because every lot's a little different, but we would expect our average that the first time that shovel hits the dirt to when we turn over the keys, we actually expect that, easily by the end of this year, our average will be 30 days, which is an amazing thing for the neighbors, for yourself. Just think about if you are putting it up for rent, your average rent that you can get for these, just in San Jose is probably, $2,800 a month. If you were able to do that in a month instead of in a year, all that rental income accrues to you, and, you do the discounted cash flow on near-term cash income as opposed to income from 30 years away from now. It's really valuable income.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. So the experience, and we take care of everything. We take care of the permits, the soil surveys, the management of anything that needs to be done, the installation, scheduling the product to be built in the offsite factory. There's pretty much nothing you need to do. And you can also imagine, it takes a year to do it with a contractor. You're probably for sure going to have a variance. But you also have to go manage it for a year. That's and you have to go manage your neighbors for a year. They're not going to like this.
Well, that actually gets to another part of the question here is the community and the state and like the acceptance and desire here and the policy. What's going on there? I know there's some new, I find it optimistic that like, the state governments, not just in California, but generally around the country are starting to be more aware of the need for density to help solve our affordability crisis. And so some of those restrictions are loosening up. What are you finding at the local level and like, what's going on there?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the state of California. They have a real housing problem. They think they have a housing problem and they want to go fix it. And they actually view ADUs as one of the primary ways to help fix this housing problem. In fact, roughly 25,000 permits last year in California, where they're putting in maybe, 100,000 units, 25,000 are ADUs. So this is the largest permit form factor that is going on in California right now. So they view this as a huge way to solve their housing problems.
25,000 ADU permits
in a year.
in California.
Wow. And here's some great data and talk about how passing laws and being pro-housing actually makes a difference. In 2016, nobody even knew what an ADU was, I don't think. I'm not sure I ever heard the term in 2016. You did hear granny flats and things like that. But ADU is a thing now. I mean, it's actually a term. So between 2016 and like 2022, which is the last complete data that we've seen, the building permits have gone up by 20x for ADUs. So think about it going from like roughly 2,000 a year to 25,000 a year. I mean, wow, that's like huge. So, and why is that? It's because California is becoming very pro-housing. So it's passed bill after bill after bill that are very pro-housing. So having an ADU today is kind of like a right. I mean, it's like you put it 4 feet from the fence, from the neighbor's fence, and you keep it, less than 16 feet high. You have a right to put one in the backyard. You don't need customer or, the neighbors to approve, which, I'll get back to in a minute. But you're able to slot these things into the backyard. And it's kind of a cool way to add capacity because you're almost like crowdsourcing, where all individual people are making their own decisions to either be entrepreneurs and like rent it out or to be able to use it however they want to use it for granting it and all those other reasons. It's just a cool way to add capacity because you don't have to put up these great big, 3-story ugly developments that nobody likes. So people think about traffic impacts and all that. Instead, you take all these things and you pop them in the backyard where, people put fences and trees and all this kind of stuff around and they kind of disappear. So it's a really crowdsourcing way almost of adding capacity without going the normal developer route and waiting for developers to have a return on investment that is appropriate for them. So what California's done is it passed a whole slew of laws. It created an enormous amount of demand, and they continue to do that. Now, that's at the California level. Now, at the individual jurisdictions, you also have like 400 jurisdictions in California that set housing policy and those kind of things. And, a lot of them have to. There's flood zones, there's, earthquake zones, there's all kinds of things going on that really matter. And then you also have the cities that don't want to densify. So what California has done with those, so some of these laws you can opt into and some of these laws you can. And when I say laws, I mentioned having a right to put an ADU, but there's also laws going on the books for splitting your lot. That if you did put up an ADU in the backyard, could you split it out and essentially turn your single family home into a condo where there's 2 individual units? Or taking a single family home and creating more densification is another bill where you can put a condo, basically next to each other. And because you have a 2-unit condo in the front, you could put an ADU attached to each of the condos. So you can turn a single family home lot into 4 units. Again, a very easy way to ease into more density, solve some of the problems without destroying the character of the neighborhood by going to all these, multi-story, big, ugly development. I'm not saying they're all ugly, but, big developments that a lot of people don't want. So and what California is doing with the jurisdictions is they want to add over 400,000 new units to the California stock by 2030, or maybe it's 2031. So what they've done is they've gone out to all these jurisdictions, they gave them an allocation. And they say, given the size of your city, you got to add 182 units. And, another city has to add 422 units. And you have to add 1,100 units. And if you don't do it, you lose the rights to control the permitting process. So it's like you have to add all these units. So they've distributed this demand, and either you comply or you lose the ability to do it. So people are taking this thing really seriously, and some of these communities are actually going out and saying that. So they have to go back to California with their actual plan. I'm going to do so many single family homes. I'm going to do so many ADUs. I'm going to do so many 3-story condo complexes. And it has to add up to their number. And if not, they're out of compliance. And some of these jurisdictions are actually only submitting ADUs as the lone solution because they think they can get people to go put these in. And they want to do this because they don't want to change the character of their neighborhood. You still have people that are anti-densification. And this is a way to appease some of those people. I mean, our units are beautiful, I think. I mean, they were good looking. They'll make the backyard and they'll make that neighborhood actually look better. I mean, I genuinely, we've tried to design them to be beautiful. We think about them as architecture. Architecture you have to look at for like 100 years. And our units we expect them to last 100 years. These are real units. These are not sheds. These are real things. And if you're going to look at it for 100 years, boy, you better be good looking.
Yeah, I like that. I like that design ethos. And I didn't realize it was the California plan was 400,000 more units. That's a great data point. The question that I have for you is when we think about affordability, we think about housing affordability in the U.S. and California in particular, is it better to look at these as density? Like here's one more unit you can rent for $2,500 in San Jose, or is it better to think of them as income? Like now I can offset my 7% mortgage rate with $2,500 a month of income. Walk me through the math on how you think about the affordability impact of what you're building.
Yeah. So let's just take a cost. So one of these things, reason these are attractive, particularly in California, let's take San Jose as an example. Very modest. You live in you live in California. Where do you live, Jim?
I live in San Francisco. Yeah.
So you know what the costs are like around here. San Jose is a very modest place, I think, from a housing standpoint. It's not Palo Alto, it's not Mountain View, it's not Atherton, it's not Mill Valley. To me, it's a very modest place. And the average single-family home is like $1.6 million, last I looked, in San Jose. And it's only like 1,400 square feet. It's not like it's big. It's kind of small. Or maybe 1,600 square feet, I think it's the average, maybe. I don't know. You read all kinds of different data points on that, but it's modest, is my point. You could probably put a 1-bedroom, 1-bath in the marketplace in a reasonable, maybe not everywhere in San Jose, but in a lot of places and make, $2,800 a month, maybe $2,500 a month. If you think about buying a unit for $300,000, if you fully financed it at today's, at like a 6.5% rate or so, you're looking at $1,600 a month in cost. So in addition to $1,600 a month of cost, you have to do some taxes, call that, $1,900 a month in, with taxes, but you get to depreciate it, because it's rental income. You get to maybe write off the heat pump. You maybe get to write off some of the solar. You get tax credits. You get, everybody's tax situation is a little bit different, but the government has always, since like the 50s, have stimulated real estate by allowing you tax deductions. The most obvious example, and if you have an interest payment, you can write that off if you're going to rent it out. So because you've already paid for the land, the cash flow, the ability to immediately cash flow these in California is extremely high. Like you should be able to cash flow them the next month. And that's untypical for real estate. A lot of times it takes time and you have to get your depreciation, all your allowances before you start building up into your cash flow. So you already paid for the land. And, the thing we think about when we think about the economics and, whether it's right for income, that's everybody has to decide, do they want income on demand, which the cash flow is fantastic, or do they want to use it for their home office, which, might also be, a way of, being able to focus on your business that allows you to be able to, maybe that has a return on investment as well. So I think everybody has to make their own individual decisions. I think over the course of, 17 years, you might use it in many different ways. I mean, if you're a new homeowner, I'm going to put up an ADU immediately, and I'm going to have it help me pay for the rent in the front yard, or help me pay the mortgage in the front yard. Because when I buy that front yard, I pay for all the land. And unless you put something on, the land's kind of a cost center. I think about land being a cost center. You got to mow the grass, you got to water it, you got to plant plants, you got to pay taxes on it. It's like a cost center. Why not turn that amazingly expensive real estate in San Jose into some of that returns on investment? And this thing costs $300,000, whether you're in San Jose or whether you're in Palo Alto. If you put this in Palo Alto, you'll probably get $4,000 a month, and it costs you the same.
It costs the same. Well, and that actually goes to the density demand issue, right? We have the demand for living in Palo Alto, and it's closer in, and therefore, like it maybe incentivizes more construction of that.
Yeah. So just getting to the density issue, there are school teachers in Palo Alto, and I don't think they're living in Palo Alto. Everybody always picks on this or talks about the school teachers, but it's a good example. The school teachers probably might be living in Morgan Hill, and they're teaching in Palo Alto. And, every day when that person goes to work, they're like, man, I got to find a job closer to home. It's a way for people to live in the communities where they work and be part of those communities in a very non-invasive way. It doesn't have those 3-story condos that are intrusive or, maybe not in the character of the neighborhood like we talked about, but it's a way to add additional density, which has real value. And once you start living in Palo Alto, working in Palo Alto, you obviously don't have as much emissions from your car. You don't have all that wasted time. You start living a better way. I mean, it's just a way to live better. So some people, so all this density and from a city and a jurisdictional standpoint, they kind of love it. I mean, if they put more density in the backyard, they've already paid for the police force. They've already got the fire department figured out. The roads are already paved. The sewer main goes across the front of the house. That's very different than adding another suburb on the outskirts of South San Jose or Morgan Hill, where you actually have to put in all the street infrastructure and figure out how you're going to service it from a fire and a emergency vehicle and a police and all that kind of stuff. So the cost for the city go way down as a result of this densification. So you got city benefits. The people living there obviously have a benefit, and the people, if they're doing it for income, the nicer or closer they are to the city, the more income they get. It's classic real estate. It's all about location.
Yeah.
So it could be any of those things. And I'm I've been through more cycles than a lot in terms of kids and grandkids and all this kind of stuff, and seeing how life has changed and evolved. And all I got to say is you are going to use it in every one of these different ways.
That's terrific. I love that background. And so let's shift then to longer term demographic. Like, you're obviously well researched in your planning here. And if you think about, the next decade, so California wants to add 400,000 homes in the next 5 or 6 years. But what do you see longer term? Trends, ebbs and flows. We have boomers who suddenly are maybe finally retiring. Tell me what your thought pattern is there. What are the things we should be paying attention to? Like, is this a 2020 problem, and all of a sudden in 2030 we're like, we're stuck with all these, these ADUs in the backyard. Tell us what we're thinking about here.
Yeah. I love the demographics as it relates to ADUs. So let's talk about a number of different trends. Let's just talk about the demographics of like the Bay Area as an example. I mean, you have a lot of multi-generational living is actually cultural. So to be able to house a bigger family longer for the kids, but certainly having the parents come co-locate is a huge trend, just culturally. just not because they can't live in their own place, because maybe they don't want to live in their own place. They actually want to live with the kids. And, if you're going to put your parents, you don't want them in the third bedroom. Maybe you do at your house, or maybe your wife's parents in your third bedroom, but wouldn't it be great to have them in your backyard? And, then all of a sudden you have an instant babysitter and all that. And I can tell you, as you get older, you start thinking about where you're going to spend your final days. There's no better place than the backyard of your kid. There was a really good study out. The number one fear of aging people is not death. That's actually number 2. The number one fear is going to a nursing home.
Yeah.
So you think about that. So anyways, so you got the demographics of, California, which it's culturally more necessary. So I think that's a big trend. Obviously on a more national basis, you've got boomers that are looking for a place. And like I said, part of it's staying in your house as long as you can. You've, obviously heard that as much as you can, but part of it is also living out the last days in a very secure place, which is great to be in your backyard. We had one of the people that wanted to buy one of our units, and the whole strategy was very successful, wealthy. In fact, lived in a really nice home. His whole strategy is move in the ADU, but only be there 6 months and then travel for 6 months. He wanted to go to all Europe and all this stuff. He worked hard all his life, worked 60 hours a week. His entire life was 63. He was going to rent out the front of the house because the front of the house was worth a really lot of money. So he was going to live in the back of the house, but only planned to be there half the time. At his convenience, if he chose, and he wanted to go do that for years. At his convenience, if he wanted to change his mind, he just, the rental lease goes away in the front of the house and moves back in. But his whole plan was to move back there and have his daughter and their 2 kids, and son-in-law and their 2 kids move into the front of the house. So he's like, I'm locking up my spot for the future. Which is a really cool thing. So you got the boomer effect, you've got the demographics and some of the cultural effects, and you just got pure cost. It's just, when Johnny gets out of college, it's like really expensive to go try to get your own place. And, Johnny doesn't want to be in your third bedroom either.
Yeah.
I don't know how your kids...
I love that. That's really fascinating. So the boomers, with the fear of nursing home and an ultra low mortgage locked in forever. And the boomers own all the real estate. So rather than building an in-law or a granny flat for granny, you're like, I'm granny. You have the rest of that. Like, I could imagine that is a shift that starts to take. We start to imagine, we shift from imagining like we're going to put granny there to realizing like granny owns all the land in this country. so maybe granny puts herself there so that she can bring the family in. That's a fascinating shift in frame.
I'll even give you something that's super real. My son has an extra house on where he lives. The main house is his main house. He has 3 kids. There's an extra lot. There's an extra house on the property, and it's like 1,100 square feet. I am planning on which fruit trees I want to be there in 20 years, and I'm planning them now. I literally have like 3 different kinds of apple trees growing right now that are only 2.5 feet high, and I'm going to design the backyard of the little backyard home, and I'm going to make sure that the fruit trees there are the ones that I like and the varieties I like. Because, it takes like 10 years for fruit trees to go. And I'm not that old. But I'm just like, this is my backup. It's just like a backup plan. I don't know if we'll ever go there. But if I do, I'm going to have all the fruit I want. Because I like fresh orange juice in the morning. I like fresh chicken eggs. I like apples. I like apple juice.
Amazing. It's
it's a backup plan.
Plant a tree. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Yeah. So you're planting it now. I love it. That's really great. And it's a fascinating, trend as we think about the shift in country. And, as we track the housing market, we've been expecting for years that boomers were going to sell their homes, and they just keep not. And you can understand because you have such a good deal on a mortgage that you want to hold this house forever. And so one way to do that is to put yourself in the granny flat. I think that's really terrific. Let's shift to construction. So you talked a little bit about the like how the stuff is built, or the quality and the design thinking. Are there technical innovations that had to happen to make this happen now? Like, why now can we do this?
Well, so I've always been fascinated by manufacturing, and maybe because I've just got a productivity gene in me that I like everything to be productive, and that extends across into my personal life and everything else. So, but it's in a factory you can do different things. So in a factory, everybody shows up at 7 o'clock. If their shift starts at 7 o'clock, they don't show up at 7:05. They don't show up at 7:10 because they have to work on a line, and there's a flow to a line, and it's a system, and you can't have people rolling in at different times that you might see on a construction site. In a factory, you have no impact from the elements outside. So it doesn't matter if it's raining, it's storming, it's snowing, it's whatever it is. In a factory, you have a very controlled environment. And it also means you can have exactly the environment you want. You could tell people, wear these kind of gloves so you don't nick the product or scratch it, or don't wear belt buckles, or don't, you end up with a very, very controlled environment for all the people working there. And in a factory, you're allowed to learn. So because you don't have all these outside impacts, every single time you build something, you can learn. You can make it bigger. You can what's called poka-yoking it, which just means you're able to eliminate, you can have fixtures and tools that allow you to eliminate variation. And you can implement those things. You keep implementing them. As you build more and more and more, you get better and better and better. So it tends to eliminate the scrap and eliminate waste, and there's more precision. And when there's more precision, there's less things that can go wrong. You have, what's called, in manufacturing, a process capability window that you can keep driving bigger and bigger, which just means you can, if you're in your window, hey, your screw needs to go in within plus or minus quarter inch, and it's still a good product, you can have a wider and wider process characterization. We put it in all our screws perfectly. So it comes across a computer, it comes across using software where that hole is punched perfectly, and the length of that 2x4 is precise. So this allows you to really do precision engineering. It allows you to eliminate waste. It allows you to learn in a controlled environment. It allows higher productivity because those workers are in this controlled environment. So from a manufacturing worker standpoint, it's really interesting. Now, the second thing that's really interesting about a manufacturing compared to like a more typical construction is you can optimize materials in a better way. So at a job site, I talked about being in the backyard for 30 days. You think about what happens if you still build it with a general contractor. They're bringing all their 2x4s and they're dumping them somewhere. I'm pretty sure it's going to be on your property. Good luck with the plants. But you've got all this stuff that comes in that's purchased for that use case. Now, if you're in a factory, you now have the option to say, hey, because I've got a factory and I've got a warehouse, I can say, buy 10 sets of windows. Don't buy one set of windows and drop ship one set. Buy 10 sets of windows. And that allows me to achieve what we call economic order quantities, where you can achieve higher and higher levels of efficiency, where you may be able to buy bulk in repeatable items. And because you know the factory schedule and because you've dialed it in, you're able to run it at a certain pace. You don't have to have a lot of excess inventory because you know what the pace of the line is. So you time this materials coming in. So what that does is it allows you to buy economically in terms of quantities that make sense instead of one-off and one single drops. But it also allows you to source more flexibly. So now I don't have to source it from Ferguson's down the street. I can source it from, maybe I can bypass the distributor and source it directly from the manufacturer because I'm now buying an economic order quantities, and it's now efficient for that manufacturer to ship it to me directly. So you've got these factory efficiencies, you got these materials efficiencies, and then that gives you all kinds of degrees of freedom because you're sourcing anywhere in the world. That is the most optimal way to source. You have more choice of what kind of products to source because you have a wider lens. You don't have to source it from the distributor, in the Bay Area. You now can source it from whoever you want. So what you're trying to do is there's just these tremendous amount of efficiencies that you're able to put to use that a general contractor stick building in a site just can't get to. And the other thing is you control the resources in a factory. One last thing, I'll just talk about the control in the subs. A general contractor, even a large one, like Lennar or D.R. Horton and all that, they very often they do a project, they sub out the electrical, they sub out the plumbing, they sub out the foundation, they sub out the framing, they sub out the painting, they sub out the drywall. None of these people work for them. So they got to coordinate all this stuff. And, you're subject to whatever team they give you. And, sometimes they can make it that day. Sometimes they can't. Sometimes it rains, so they can't get there at all. And it's just hard. So to be able to achieve the efficiencies that you can in the factory just doesn't happen in the field. It's just a different way of operating. It doesn't mean it's bad because they're good at it. That's what they do. They're good at managing all those subs. But I really like the factory concept. And, I've been doing it my entire life, putting up factories and optimizing them. And besides it being fun, it's like really efficient.
That's great. Where are you doing the manufacturing?
We're doing it in Mexicali.
Okay, so just over the border?
Yeah, so it's like 5 miles from the border. And it's kind of closer to like Arizona, California border. So, the biggest ADU market in the country by far is LA. So it's very close to LA. But you can easily service the California market from that factory. You can easily service the Phoenix area marketplace. And, we even think you can service the Texas marketplace.
Okay, cool. I know that I've seen data where we actually have fewer manufactured homes happening now than we did, say, in the 90s, and I think one of the reasons is because the factories for those manufactured homes were in the Northeast. And in the 90s, we were still building homes in the Northeast, and now we're building homes in the South and the Southwest. And so the factories are further away from the homes. And so we're actually doing fewer of them. Is your experience say the same? Do I have that right?
I think it's difficult to make a lot of the U.S. factories work. So you want to get the trade-off of being close to where your market is, but you also want to think about costs. And this is where I'm kind of bullish on Mexico. I think a lot of those manufacturers don't have a history with Mexico, and I think it's a big jump for them to head to Mexico. When I left Flex, I think we probably had 40 to 45,000 people in Mexico. We were probably maybe the third largest international company in terms of size in Mexico.
Wow.
Yeah. And some of those I literally picked out the cornfields and started from scratch. We had one operation down there that was like 23,000 people, and I literally went down with a couple my team from Flex. We picked out a cornfield that we were going to develop on, and
wow.
To see it, 20 years later is just amazing. So some people don't have. You have to know how to run. It's a technology to know how to run factories, to know where to run factories and how to run factories that are international, and then how to actually manage a supply chain that feeds international factories. That's not trivial. A lot of the traditional manufacturers don't do that, are nervous about it. And I think it's hard to get to the cost that you really need. Our objective is to have the most amazing designs in the world with high-end materials, and be able to build them as cost effectively as you possibly can. And I think a lot of times it's going to make real hard to do in the Northeast. I think even in some places in the South, it's kind of hard. For sure, it's hard in California, I think, even though there's a number of different factories. I actually think we have the right strategy. And, we'll see how that plays out. But I'm a bull in Mexico. The more we can drive the costs of manufacturing down, the nicer the materials can be. Yeah. So you go into our units, our 1 bedroom, our 2 bedroom, 1 bath, or studio, they're all pocket doors. And we have high-end hinges holding those pocket doors. And these are all solid core pocket doors. A lot of people think that pocket doors are cheap. They're not in our units. And what allows us to be able to put really nice materials into our units is the fact that we're extremely driven. We might be obsessed by design, but we're also obsessed about driving to the lowest possible costs we can so that we can bring amazing designs and very affordable pricing. And that's something that we think we do, across the board. When we think about every single element, whether it's insulation or, we put 5/8 inch plywood or 5/8 inch drywall. Everybody else uses a 1/2 inch. We put an inch and an eighth on the floorboard. Everybody else does 3/4, standard production techniques. Our insulation values are higher. We use, metal insulated panels on the outside to drive up that insulation. We have oak baseboards. No one else has oak baseboards. We have an unlimited warranty on our floor. We've got so many different things that we try to take every single element and figure out how do we have amazing materials that has no maintenance, but at the same time we can build cost effectively and be as cost effective as anybody else.
That's terrific.
I'm going to give you one other, Mike. I know you want to ask a question. I want to give you one other benefit. I firmly believe that our costs can actually go down over time. There is no contractor that are saying his costs are going down over time. Just pure inflation means that a general contractor working in the field who has to bid a project now and then go find labor a year and a half from now, once all his permits and approvals, all that kind of stuff, he has to dip into the unknown of what that market is like, the availability of electricians a year and a half from now, the availability of plumbers, all those kind of things. But one thing you can be sure of with inflation, you're going to have 5% cost increase every year, both of the input materials and as well the labor. In a factory, I would expect that the factory learns. It's continually learning. It's continually value engineering. It's continually eliminating waste and finding fixtures and materials and things that drive the efficiency that I would expect any inflationary increases of labor and materials to be offset by efficiencies and learnings. And you can't achieve that. So I think that's one of the other benefits that I didn't mention earlier. When you get into a factory, you get into a way of operating that can actually beat inflation. So when I think about where we are going to be 3 years from now, I actually hope we're going to be at the same price we are now. And no one else is.
Right. That sounds like your expertise is valuable in that angle. Do you have a view on manufactured homes in general? Like does your thinking apply broader than the ADUs that you're working on?
Well, every ADU is a little different. So when you talk about manufactured homes, a lot of them are built to a HUD standard. And that standard is some of the lower specs that I just mentioned a moment ago. Things like, thinner plywood or thinner plywood, building it, or, different specs. We use 2x6 metal steel frame. I mean, nothing's getting better than that. And so they build the different standards. And it's why I think also one of the challenges that we have with ADUs is people think they're a level down in terms of quality. And it's because a lot of the manufactured homes were a level down in quality and still are built a level down in quality today. We don't build our homes to that. We build our home is usually better than the front of the house, and most often better and higher quality than the front of the house. In addition, then it comes with a big warranty and all that kind of stuff, and it's brand new. But we don't design ours. So one of the challenges we actually have with ADUs is an ADU could be anything. I mean, my ADU is taking my garage. I did it myself. Back when I was in my 20s, I put up the plywood. I ran the electrical. You could, and all of a sudden it's an ADU. Well, it wasn't an ADU because it didn't have a kitchen in it, but official ADU. But you can have any standard. Home Depot, you can buy a kit for like $49,000. It's not what we sell. And some of the manufacturing home standards that have been traditional, because these things have been around for 50 years. This is not a new thing. But usually those standards were often a lower level spec. So it had a reputation of not being as good. And that's actually something we have to fight now, because an ADU could be anything from a shed to what we're selling, which is, I'd challenge anything in the front of the house to be, as good as our house. So you've got this range. And what we're trying to do is charge what a manufactured home costs, but have our quality of materials and our precision engineering system and our tightness around, the energy efficiency and all those kind of things. So, but yeah, you can make them to any standard you want. It's just like your house. I mean, how much do you pay for, you can build a home for $2,000 a square foot and have a really nice home, or you can build it for $300 a square foot and have a really, a 2x4 home. You can have any standard.
Yep. This has really been a great tour of the ADUs and what you're building specifically at Samara. Let's wrap up. I'd like to let people know how to find Samara, like find the units. You want a discount code?
We can talk about that. Yeah. Not to all your listeners though. No, you go to www.samara.com. We have a showroom in Redwood City, which is indoor. And what I can tell you is people come in here and they love it because they come in here and you can't feel kind of the quality that I'm talking about. And we've got cathedral ceilings that are over 10 feet. You can't feel that in pictures. You kind of have to experience it. And usually when people come in, they go, wow, this is way nicer than I thought. And it's like, you got to work on your pictures. And it's like, well, we just can't get our pictures to feel like the real thing. But anyways, we have an indoor showroom in Redwood City that's open. Anytime people want to come, love to have you come down, Mike, and I can give you a tour and show you this stuff in detail. And we also have like an outdoor showroom in Thousand Oaks, California. And by an outdoor showroom, we actually put it in a place which is outdoors, and you can actually come see it in an outdoor setting. So, and we'll have more locations over time, but, love to get any of your readers in. Just, come into www.samara.com and we'll set you up with a private tour.
I love it. I love it. I will swing by Redwood City. That will be terrific. And so you're shipping, people are buying, they're installing them now. How's 2024 looking?
24. So we're, like I said, we just recently started marketing. It takes time, permits and all those kind of things. It takes like 6 months to ramp up. We're cranking, I would say. And different than the interest rates. We haven't talked much about interest rates, but, I would expect we have double-digit increases literally every single quarter this year. I mean, not double-digit. I mean, high double digits.
Yeah.
So that compounds very rapidly as you know, if it's, like real high double digits. So right. I would expect, our leads are extremely high. Interest is very high. We're booking a lot of units. We're filling up our factory. We're very happy about how things are turning out. Amazing. I was always worried that with the interest rates, everything would come to a crash. Yes. Turns out a lot of people have cash.
Yeah, well, that's it. That's fascinating. And you mentioned the 17 years in California, the average stay in houses across the country is growing over 10, 11 years. It used to be like 7. And people have cash. They have low housing expense if they're locked in on the mortgage rate, right? Which everybody is. And so it's fascinating. And I think coupled with the fact that you, as you pointed out, like, if I want to add square footage to my house, I can go up and battle with all the neighbors, or I could drop a thing like this in and like get instant square footage. I could see the appeal for a lot of folks in especially in a high interest rate environment when my current cost is low, but my expansion cost is high.
Yeah. Yeah, you got your locked in interest rates, and you also have Prop 17, remember, where you're paying the tax rate on whenever you bought the property.
Prop 13, yes, California Prop 13, yep.
Yeah, so if you put a 500 square foot addition on your house, you're going to revalue the whole house. If you put a separate ADU in the back, you only pay tax on the ADU, the incremental cost of the ADU.
Oh, is that right?
So you get locked in not only by interest, but also by taxes.
Yeah, well, in California, I talk about that a lot at California Prop 13, and it's one of the reasons our state has chronic shortage of inventory is because our property taxes are so low, and we hoard real estate in California. We keep it for longer. And as you pointed out, 17 years. And so I didn't realize that it's actually tax advantaged to put it in as an ADU rather than
an
extending
addition.
the house.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Wow. So many great things that I learned today, Mike. I really appreciate the tour of the ADUs and your technology and your approach to it. Let's wrap it up there, though. Everybody, this is the Top of Mind podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you got a lot out of this concept. And, as we talk about affordability a lot here, and I am fascinated by the potential density and this kind of innovation to help solve some of our crises in the whole country, not just California. So if you like the podcast, please appreciate a review, give us some stars on your podcast app that helps other people find us. And we will be back again next time with another interview. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks. All right. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Top of Mind. If you enjoyed the show, I'd really appreciate leaving a nice review on your favorite podcast app. That helps other people find us as well. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. See you soon.